Chapter 58, The Hairstylists, Antony's POV. Antony was shy after telling Hanyu his story. He felt he'd maintained an admirable level of control in his recounting. He'd left his feelings out of it as much as possible, though he'd slipped up by telling about his and Valerius's dreams for the future, or Sana's glee over the anniversary dissection. He'd given too many details about both his former loves, in fact, but still, he'd kept mostly to a recital of events. Unfortunately, the fact that he hadn't described his feelings didn't keep him from remembering them. This was why he didn't fucking think about all that. What was the point? The sob story hadn't even persuaded Hanyu to leave, so it had just been a futile exercise in misery. He wanted to go to Marcus again, but Hanyu was being so clingy he doubted he'd be able to pry himself away. He probably shouldn't take another beating when he hadn't fully replenished his blood supply from the first anyhow. Moreover, he didn't want to deal with the contempt he was sure to see on his lover's face. Marcus hated it when Antony let himself get carried away with all these foolish old feelings. By now, he could supply the scornful words himself, Marcus's exact intonations rattling around in his own head. It's been hundreds of years. You've had more time to get over this than anyone else in history. You were always going to outlive them, and your mother too. What's 50 years more or less to us? You need to learn to take some responsibility for the way you feel. You can't just keep wallowing in the same stupid problems forever. They were all true, but it never helped. He couldn't stop missing them. It would catch him at odd moments, little flashes of memories that gutted him even after all these years. His mother sitting with Theo, who adored the older woman because she always spoke frankly and never used metaphors or figures of speech, making it so easy for Theo to understand her. The perpetual half-moons of dirt under Valerius's nails, Sana's quick, clever smile and dizzying kisses. Antony was so pathetic. He was never strong enough to push the pain away forever. He'd been doing well for a while. He'd found a routine that allowed him to avoid the memories, whiling away his time in books and music and sex and a dozen other hobbies, but lately it had all been turned upside down. It was because of Hanyu. He knew that. The boy had ruined all his carefully constructed habits and opened his old wounds. He'd made Antony question the most important aspect of his hard-won peace, his distance from the humans who lived with him. He'd introduced strain to Antony's relationship with Marcus, the relationship that was supposed to be the one thing he could depend upon as he faced down eternity. For all this, Antony should have hated the brat. But he didn't. He couldn't. All Hanyu had done was be himself and adore Antony. The sins turning that innocent affection into a torment weren't his fault. As such, Antony wrestled down his nerves and gave up on getting away from his offering today. It wasn't the boy's fault that at the moment his presence felt like fingernails on a sunburn, or at least what Antony remembered it feeling like. "All right," Antony said. "Let me do your hair. I'm going to draw you." Hanyu squealed delightedly and almost skipped out to the couch, where he grabbed a pillow and plopped down on top of it. Damn. Antony had let this turn into a ritual, hadn't he? He wasn't very good at ensuring that he didn't become attached. At least this way he didn't have to look at Hanyu's face. That eased his claustrophobia a little. Later, when he drew the boy, the paper would act as a barrier and he wouldn't have to worry about making the right facial expressions or coming up with something to say in the wake of having said so much. Yes, this evening could be endured, as long as he planned their activities carefully. He grabbed a handful of hairpins and the brush, then sat behind the boy and handed him the pins. "Here, pick what you want." Hanyu sorted through the glittering pile as best he could without moving his head. Antony was hardly surprised when he chose an especially sparkly one with a bird on it. After a moment of silence, Hanyu spoke. "May I ask you something, my lord?" "My lord, in private?" Antony must have really frightened his offering with the suggestion that Hanyu leave, or his grisly life story, or both. He separated a golden lock from its fellows. "Yes." Hanyu held up another hairpin, this one fashioned to look like a row of flowers. "Why do you have all these? You just wear the same plain braid every day." Antony shrugged. "I used to style my hair differently, and I'm sure I will again sometime. I just haven't bothered lately." Lately being for at least 500 years, now that he thought about it, but Hanyu didn't need to know that. Can I fix your hair when you're done with mine? Hanyu asked. Why? Nobody's drawing a picture of me. Even though Antony couldn't see the boy's face, he could read the pout in the set of Hanyu's shoulders. It's just so pretty. It shouldn't be in that same braid all the time. Antony was opening his mouth to complain that it was his hair, and so it should be however the hell he wanted it to be, when it occurred to him that he hadn't exactly asked if Hanyu wanted his hair styled. Anyhow, it wouldn't hurt anything. He owed his offering some indulgence. All right, fine, he growled, and then had to start his own hairstyling efforts over again when Hanyu's joyous bouncing disrupted his work. Thank you! This'll be so much fun! You'll see, I'm good at fixing hair. Asao and I... Hanyu cut himself off, wilting. Antony started over in silence. He wished he knew what to say to make the boy feel better, but he was wary of mentioning Asao at all in case it sent Hanyu into another fury. In truth, he didn't have anything against Asao. Every time he moved his arms, half a dozen neat wounds sliced into his shoulders and biceps screamed a reminder that Marcus could be rough. How was a fragile human supposed to hold on to his secrets in defiance of that power, even to protect a friend? Asao was only doing what he had to do to survive, and Antony knew a thing or two about doing what one would rather not in the name of survival. Repeating every word from Hanyu's mouth was far less morally objectionable than surviving by enslaving and feeding from people. Antony was in no position to judge the man. He lets you fix his hair? He ventured at last. Hanyu's shoulders stayed slumped. He used to, my lord. Accustomed to honorifics since he was a child, Antony never would have thought that he could miss the sound of his name so badly. He cast about for something to say that would cheer his offering up. He's got lovely hair, he tried, though in truth he hadn't really noticed one way or the other. Almost as pretty as yours. Hanyu didn't even react to the compliment, and Antony was annoyed to realize that he was panicky about that. 2 months ago, he would have laughed at anyone who told him that he would work himself into a frenzy because a human was sad and he felt responsible. Now he could barely manage to concentrate long enough to sweep Hanyu's hair into a twist and fix it with the pin. There, he said. Now, if you'll just sit down on the sofa, I'll get my pencils and... Hanyu whirled around, tripping himself on his robes. What about your hair? You said I could. But you're sad now, Antony argued. I thought... The boy shrugged, his face rueful. Well, yes, a little, but fixing your hair will cheer me up. Antony handed over the comb and rolled his eyes. Fine, I wasn't trying to get out of it, I just wanted to be considerate. It sounded like a joke. Antony, considerate? Antony, who had traumatized one attendant after another, who had left Theo to bear her sorrows alone, who had reduced Hanyu to sobs of terror more times than he cared to think of? Not likely. Antony plucked down on the pillow as soon as Hanyu vacated it. It was still warm from his offering's body, which sent an inexplicable jolt of pleasure through him. He must have been missing heat more than he thought. Hanyu settled on the sofa, and Antony tried to relax against his knees, the way the boy always did when their positions were reversed. He couldn't quite manage it, though. Antony hated that Hanyu knew about everything. His offering's gaze felt like ants crawling over the back of his neck now that there was so much knowledge behind it. He wanted simultaneously to spend every minute with Hanyu, distracting him so he couldn't think about anything he'd learned today, and to run away and never see the boy again. That was the worst thing about living on ships. He had nowhere to run. Hanyu plucked up his braid and undid the band that held it. His fingers worked gently at the strands until Antony's hair hung over his shoulders and his scalp tingled pleasantly. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Antony! Hanyu's voice was so alarmed that Antony didn't even have a moment to be pleased at the reappearance of his name. What happened? Antony twisted to peer up at his stricken face. What are you talking about, boy? Your head! Hanyu gestured, wide-eyed. That huge sore! What happened? Oh. Antony had forgotten about the handful of hair Marcus had ripped out yesterday. The wound would be smaller by this point, but still alarming. He wished now he'd taken more blood from Hanyu to speed the healing process. He thought fast. It's fine. I told you I hurt myself last night, remember? I fell and hit my head on the edge of a door. Hanyu tore his gaze away from Antony's scalp and met his eyes, blinking. Oh! Antony's gut twisted a little at his unquestioning belief. The lie was painfully obvious, but Hanyu had swallowed it anyway. Was it possible that the boy still trusted him? Why? And why had he lied? He could have just explained that it had been rough sex the way he had before. But Hanyu had been so troubled the last time, and anyhow, that would be one vulnerability too many. Now that he had exposed his deepest metaphorical wounds, it simply wasn't possible to go into much detail about the literal ones. I'm not going to do anything to your hair, Hanyu announced, pulling Antony out of his thoughts. That looks much too sore. Didn't it hurt when you made your braid? Antony shrugged. Well, yes. But how else was I going to cover it up? No sense making everyone look at that mess. These are the sort of things we short people have to think about, you know. If you had a wound on top of your head, you wouldn't have to worry about anyone but the stars getting a look. It worked. Hanyu giggled, and as soon as he heard the boy's laughter, Antony found himself relaxing, just a little. I'm not that tall. Hanyu smoothed Antony's hair with a light, reverent hand. Anyhow, you would see it when I knelt. Antony sat for a moment and let himself be petted. It felt, well, Hanyu's large, warm hands were so careful on him, as though Antony were the one in danger of being hurt. It should have been nice. At the very least, there was no reason for it to feel awful. But it did. Antony felt like he couldn't get a lungful of air, which was a ridiculous thing to panic over when he didn't need air. He felt crowded by one person and deafened by what noise? And all he wanted was to pull away. Still, he managed to hold himself in place and submit to the reverent touches until he felt sure that Hanyu wouldn't take it the wrong way when he moved. Well, if you've given up on making me pretty, I might as well get to work drawing you. He rolled to his feet. You're already pretty, Hanyu said loyally, and Antony huffed a laugh. That's kind of you to say. Now, I think I'd like you to read aloud while I draw. Go ahead and choose a book, but not one of the animal ones, all right? I don't want you interrupting to ask what everything is. All right. Hanyu scrambled for the bookshelf, and, despite his longing for solitude, Antony couldn't resist the smile that stole over his lips. Nothing had really changed. He was still going to introduce Hanyu to Felix and Iovita, bring Thad and Cloelia around, and see if he could find the boy a better master. But for now, Hanyu was happy enough to be here, so surely there was no harm in allowing it.